Sure. Back in 2015, we had the Obergefell v. Hodges decision. And basically what they did, now remember, this is another activist judge stuff where because people did not want same-sex marriage. They voted it down again and again and again. So Obergefell goes to the Supreme Court, and then Justice Kennedy talks about, federally, at a federal level, well, basically the status of marriage bestows a constellation of benefits upon you. And how can we deprive two people of the same sex who want these benefits? How can we deprive them of these benefits simply because they're of the same sex? So when I read that, I talked with a friend that I've been working with about this a long time. I said, look at what they've said here. If they keep Obergefell, they have to get rid of no-fault divorce, because what they're saying is we cannot deprive these people of these federal benefits. And there's also state benefits. There's one law professor out of South Carolina, and I think her name is Marcia Zug, but she said that marriage bestows upon you over 1,150 federal benefits and additional state benefits. So if these benefits, we really can't deny two people who love each other these benefits. How can you take them away from me?
And welcome to Tearing Down High Places. My name's Average Joe. Got Pastor Jeff and Pastor Tim, fellas. Welcome to the end of August.
Time's flying.
Here we are. Well, listen, guys, I got a great guest today. Today's my turn to introduce the guest because I know him kind of well. I've had him on my old podcast, which was called Saving Fatherhood. Had him on there a couple of times when I was interviewing different alienated parents and people who went through really bad divorces and lost their kids and things like that. The core issue was always no-fault divorce. And I don't remember exactly how I met our guest today. His name is Jeff Morgan, but he is the nation's #1 advocate to end no-fault divorce. And he had this YouTube page with 10,000 subscribers, and he really got into the nuts and bolts of it. And guess what? He's a former pastor and missionary. He's going to come on today and tell us how he might be the guy that actually ends no-fault divorce here in the United States.
Joe, when you mentioned this idea, it was right when I was preaching Ecclesiastes 5. And Ecclesiastes 5 says, do not be rash to make a vow, but pay what you vow. Mm-hmm. And he said, Solomon said, it's better to not vow than to vow and not pay. Mm-hmm. And he talks about the importance of vows. You can shipwreck your entire life by a vow that you don't pay. So marriage is a vow. When you stand before God and man and make a statement, what you say with your words matters in the presence of God. And an oath is different than just an ordinary thing that is said, because you're invoking the name of God. You're doing this in the presence of witnesses. It's a marriage oath. It's a vow. So we need to regard that as a sacred thing.
Amen. And that's what we want to do. And in order to do that and hold people accountable, we need to eliminate no-fault divorce. Let's welcome Jeff Morgan. Welcome to Tearing Down High Places.
Hi, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Pastor Tim, Pastor Jeff, Average Joe Gormley. Thank you so much for having me on here. And I want to just say one thing first. Joe, you have been a blessing to me. So I talked with Joe with regard to what's going on right now. And he said, anytime, brother, you need somebody to pray for you, you just give me a call. And then he even said later on, he said, if you need somebody to pray, just text me. And there have been times, Joe, that I have felt like, physically you go through things, and then at the same time, you feel like you're standing against the fury of hell, like hell is coming at you. And there have been times, Joe, that I'm like, 3 weeks ago, I was in the emergency room, having my heart checked and stuff like that. My heart's in good condition. Everything was fine, but it was just the stress of going through all of this. And, it's the unknown right now. I do think that, those who are with us are greater than those who are with them. I've told you, Joe, that if this gets turned over, I don't know that I want to volunteer for another mountain to take like Caleb White might do. This walk is torturous. It's hell at times, but I think we have to go through it. But I just wanted to say thank you for always being there and just being able to say, listen, I'll pray for you. And Joe, there's been a number of times that within a few minutes after you prayed, I was like, okay, you know what? We can take the next step. So prayer is very important. I solicit everyone's prayers, especially, yes, I want to take down this evil system, but more importantly, I think is that I want to see my marriage restored.
Yeah.
As you were saying that, two shall become one. They're no longer two, they're one. And when God brings you together, you're better together. And to be torn apart, it's ripping out a side of you.
Yeah.
I mean, that has impact. But thank you so much.
No, you're welcome so much. And let me just say real quick that I want to try and summarize a couple of things for the audience and for the pastor so that they can ask you some deeper questions around this. But so here's the summary of what I've seen, Jeff. You got divorced years ago and became a really powerful advocate and a person that has been involved in a lot of big cases across the country. I think of there's so many, and how I've watched you minister to other people, and you did that after you went through a no-fault divorce. You were trying to honor your marriage and biblically, and that didn't work out because the state will not. And a lot of people don't know this. This is why I'm saying this: the state does not enforce marriage vows, right?
No.
As Jeff was just talking about, it's a very important vow, and the state refuses to enforce it, and they've taken the power away from the church to be able to enforce it, right? Or the church has abdicated, depending on how you want to.
It's a little bit of both.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of both.
A lot of both, yeah.
So, so now, after all this advocating for other people, you had no idea this was going to happen, but your wife is now filing for a no-fault divorce, and while what we're praying for is her to come back to you and to just throw this whole thing away,
right?
There really is no other person that I see that I mean, if God works in such crazy ways from our perspective that wow, why wouldn't he put you in this situation to take out no fault divorce? Because you're quite frankly more knowledgeable about it than anyone I've ever met.
Yeah, and that's been one of the things that my friends here have said the same thing, and I've honestly said the same thing. I mean, there's nobody else who can do this to the same. I mean, if there is, I don't know who it is. We've been trying to go after this, and that's why it's very difficult. Because yes, I want to see it torn down. I never thought I would be the person from this place fighting from a position of standing in a court that I now actually can hit it head on. And that's what's been so torturous. But I do think you're right. It's easy to tell other people how to do it, but then now that I'm in it, I'm like, you know what? Even when you're telling people what to do and how to go about attacking it, being in it yourself, your heart is in turmoil. It's just torture. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Joe. I think that we've been studying this issue. When I say we, there's been a small group of us, been doing this probably 10, 11 years. First, no fault of, when my first wife filed for no fault divorce, no matter what I did, I could have had 20 witnesses there with me. And in fact, I even mentioned it to the judge. I said, if I had 20 witnesses here that say you shouldn't do this, would you stop the divorce? And he said, well, I don't know. I don't know. I said, the Texas Family Code says that you may grant the divorce. Oh no, I have to. No, if your issues with the legislature, I just follow the law. It's horrible. And that's when I said that any single pastor who marries a couple at the altar and he says, tries to let them know until death do you part, you're going to be marital partners for life. They're actually committing perjury in a sense. They don't realize this because the state, which loves separation of church and state, except when it gets to interfere with the covenant of the church. I took a covenant marriage. My vows were my prenuptial. My vows were my commitment to God. I will not get divorced. Are there times that you feel like you might want to almost? Of course. I was up at Bible college. I remember this one godly lady said, Jeff, I've woken up 3 times in my marriage and I've looked over at my husband. I said, why am I even here with him? But nevertheless, God takes 2 imperfect people, 2 sinful people, and he wants to make something better out of both of them. My weaknesses, she should have strengths. Her weaknesses, I should have strengths. We complement each other, but he takes 2 sinful people and he makes them the trophy of his grace. He wants to present us to say, this is God's grace at work within two sinful people. And this marriage is what I want to use to portray the relationship of Christ and the church. And the state says, Forget about that.
Crazy. So I think the thing that's going to edify a lot of people that are listening to this. First of all, people need to understand that their kids are at risk, because I've talked to so many people, Christians, loving Christians, people who love other people as they're sharing the gospel regularly, have no idea that marriage is unenforceable,
It
that
really
you
isn't.
can be unilaterally torn away from you. Why is
Right.
that a problem, Jeff?
That's a huge problem because, even if you have a marriage covenant, there are some states that have covenant marriages. But the problem is not the covenant marriage necessarily, or the marriage vows that we take before God. Why should a state be able to invalidate my vows to God and my wife's vows to God that we mutually made in the presence of many witnesses before God Himself? And the state says, oh, you know what, one of you wants out of it, that's okay. That is destructive. And actually, if you go back historically, this is something that if you go back to the 1840s, Marx and Engels wrote about the abolition of the family. Lenin came to power and he enforced that in Bolshevik Russia. He took marriage as being an ordinance from the church and made it a civil institution. And therefore, if it's a civil institution, the civil state can now rewrite the laws of marriage. And that's where divorce on demand started, at least in the 20th century, in 1917, 1918. It was so horrific what happened to society that in July of 1926, the Atlantic magazine, that bastion of conservatism, right, wrote an article called "The Russian Effort to Abolish Marriage." And what they were talking about is 8 years into no-fault divorce, the results were so devastating that they were talking amongst themselves, what do we do? And I mean, abortions were skyrocketing. They didn't really have abortions as much like that. And then it was just so many things that Stalin eventually had to reverse some of these policies because the communist society had no raw material to work with as far as what the kids are concerned. And we've seen that in our own society. 55 years plus of no-fault divorce. And people blame Reagan. And I don't know if that's 100% accurate. Yes, he signed it. But remember, the people that were telling him to sign no-fault divorce into legislation, they were lying to him. The entire divorce industry thrives on lies. They thrive on exploitation. They thrive on the destruction of the family. And they also thrive on the destruction of religious vows. So I've said that, obviously Marx, Engels, Lenin, they were very atheistic and stuff like that. They were a big influence here. But the other influence that we don't think about is Alfred Kinsey and Keynesian sexual revolution. So you have communism, totalitarianism that wants to destroy the family, destroy society, destroy the family, destroy society, and then you can reshape it into communism. But they forgot, well, I have no raw materials to work with, right? But then also Alfred Kinsey, sexual pleasures above everything. He was a pervert, sexual pervert. He did his studies that should be completely discredited. We have this so-called Keynesian science, which should be eliminated. In fact, there are some people that are trying to get laws that are based on Kinsey eliminated. But what he also did too, he was trying to advocate against marriage. So we have two strong cultural forces. Remember, Satan does not come as an evil person a lot of times. He comes as an angel of light, and then sexual freedom. You're being oppressed, and you're going to have this freedom. They dangle the carrot in front of you, but it has created devastation in our society. So between Marx, Engels, Lenin, and then Alfred Kinsey, the sexual revolution, and the church being silenced or silencing its own voice. Jesus is very explicit about no-fault divorce. Lord, can we divorce our wives for any reason, for no reason whatsoever? No. From the very beginning, it was not done this way. God created man and woman. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. The two shall become one. What therefore God has joined together, let no man tear asunder. And not no man, no state, no court, no judge. And we have Christian judges say, well, I can't do anything. What can I do? Well, you could stand up. You could be a Christian. And you could also be a pastors that don't talk about this. We have to call divorce sin. It's listed in the Sermon on the Mount, for crying out loud. Jesus is talking about divorce on the Sermon on the Mount. After murder and adultery comes divorce. So
Right.
we have underestimated, we have not preached against the evilness of this. And when we have a way to get out of something, we tend to use it rather than work through things.
Wow. Can I add to that? Malachi chapter 2, verses 13 to 18.
Absolutely.
And this second thing you do, you cover the Lord's altar with tears, with weeping and groaning, because he no longer regards the offering or accepts it with favor from your hand. But you say, why does he not? Because the Lord was witness between you and the wife of your youth, to whom you have been faithless, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant. Did he not make them one with a portion of the Spirit in their union? And what was the one God seeking? Godly offspring. So guard yourselves in your spirit, and let none of you be faithless to the wife of your youth.
Amen.
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 And that's the lack of enforcement, the lack of ability to enforce that is the problem.
And
Right?
Joe, let me add something else here too, because in the Jewish culture, Old Testament, a wife was not allowed to file for divorce legally. That's why it's written to men: "Do not divorce the wife of your youth." So and now this women's equality movement, in order to make things equal, it's not telling people, husbands, men, honor your covenant vows. What we've tried to say is now women can do it to men. That's so we have now equalized sinfulness, and that's the idea. Well, we have to give women equal rights, and the thing is that if there's a whole lot of issues with this thing here. I was listening to this Jewish lady said, well, if you don't want to get rid of no-fault divorce, you should all become Jewish, because in the Jewish religion, only a man's allowed to divorce the wife.
Yeah.
And I'm like, the thing is, even I don't know if it still works that way in the Jewish religion or not, because the state has basically said anybody for any reason, for no reason, you can make up a reason. Perjury is rampant in family court. All you have to do is allege insupportability. No facts are needed. In fact, in our Texas family code, that's what it says. Without regard, basically no facts are necessary. All you have to do is allege insupportability. Nobody knows what it means. There's discord or conflict of personality such that the legitimate ends of the marital relationship cannot be achieved. What does that mean? Nobody knows. Actually, that's a religious determination or an ideological determination, which is one reason why this one justice back in 2001 said there is no possible way to reconcile the statute with our Texas Constitution and Texas jurisprudence. So marriage is created by God, and that's what we have in our case law, ordained by God. And yet the state looks at it in a Marxist, Keynesian viewpoint, like it's just a temporary contract. We have redefined marriage. We always talk about, same-sex marriage. We redefine marriage by saying marriage is okay to be temporary. Marriage is
dating.
permanent.
It's just dating.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's dating. And we're sending people into date. And I think it would be really great to get into like how you're going to take it down, because we're about halfway through already. Can you imagine how fast time flies?
I didn't realize that. So thanks for
Jeff, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, before you get to the solution, tell me a little bit more about this Keynesian guy. What country is he from, and how did he get influence? What's his deal?
So Alfred Kinsey he wrote the Kinsey reports. He talked about men and women and their sexual proclivities and stuff like that. Well, what happened is he took a population. I think for women he interviewed prostitutes, and for men he interviewed like sexual perverts in prison. This was during one of the wars, so he couldn't get real men. He had perverts, and he used to. The stuff that he did with kids, he was a sexual pervert. He should have been put behind bars. He would masturbate little kids because he wanted to see, like at 4 months old, can these kids have orgasms? How many can they have? And this is what he was doing with the sexual research. He actually was providing this so-called science behind it that Hugh Hefner became the pamphleteer for with Playboy and other things like that. So Kinsey was the one who said kind of everybody's on a sexual spectrum, It's not male and female. It's you can move on the sexual spectrum like we have today. The people can say, well, I identify as a man today. I identify as a woman tomorrow. I identify as maybe a cat some other day. You have this whole spectrum of things. But Kinsey his laws were designed to help increase sexual promiscuity because everybody thinks this way. Everybody wants to have affairs. Everybody has these secret fantasies and stuff like that. And Kinsey, he was a horrible person. He was a sexual pervert. He should have been probably in prison or whatever because of the stuff that he did. But he influenced the sexual revolution. So, and what he did with Kinsey, they started to change biblical laws. There were biblical laws in place, and I wish I would have had this printed off here, but they had biblical laws in place. And because of the influence, not just of Marxism, but of Kinsey as well, they started to give more rationale as to why these laws no longer apply today. Okay. And so you look at, like I said, first you have Playboy, and then you have Penthouse, and then you have Hustler, and then you have who knows what at this point. bestiality, all sorts of things. You can go back to Alfred Kinsey, and his philosophy at least provided a lot of the justification of these things. Like, this is just a rational behavior of a man or of a woman. Yeah, but that if you're interviewing people from a sexual deviant population, that's not the normal population. It's a sexually deviant population. So they take sexual deviancy and now they're imposing it on society. And but then, of course, well, you can't just be tied down to one person. You might want to have multiple people. You might want not just the couples, but the thruples. And, if you start justifying unbiblical behavior. So between Marx and Kinsey, this is what's been attacking marriage.
We always got to ask, by what standard do you name that thing sexual deviancy? Because our culture that has no objective standard is constantly redefining what is and is not moral, and they have nothing, right?
Right.
So sexual deviancy means abandoning your spouse. That is sexual deviancy, and I think that's how Jesus defines it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Joe, because when I grew up, my parents were divorced. I remember right around my 16th birthday. Horrible, horrible. That's my birthday present, right? That my parents are divorced. I remember when the letter came, and it was a day or two right around that whole time and everything. But we were the oddity. Social pressure was to keep families together, not to destroy them. And now you hear people like, well, maybe she just needs to be fulfilled. Maybe she needs to find herself. And the vows, the covenants that we make to God mean nothing. Well, and even pastors, I hate to say this because the church that I went to seek help from, absolutely horrible. Like, this is an option. It's not a command of Christ. It's not that, brother or sister, you've made this vow. You should be honoring your vow. You should be honoring God. You cannot be pleasing God while you're divorcing your husband or you're divorcing your wife. And then somebody can say, well, I'm divorcing my husband, I'm divorcing my wife, and I'm a strong Christian. No, you're a disobedient Christian if you're a Christian, because it also says that, by divorcing, the verse that you read in Malachi, that's not of God's Spirit. So is God's Spirit living in the person? That's a question that maybe others can answer, but we cannot justify these types of behavior. Everything, as we know, it's through many tribulations and trials that we enter the kingdom of heaven. And sometimes they come to us in marriage. Sometimes they come to us externally. But the thing is that our commitment first and foremost is to Christ and to our commitment to him as well, and our vows to him. And then our spouse should be part of that growing process. But divorce will just destroy. It's a blatant lie. You've lied to God and you think it's going to be okay?
All right, so get to the solutions now. Tell us, where's the hope on the horizon? What can we fight for? What can we do?
So in my petition, what I've done here, and because of course it is a secular court, and by secular, I would also say an anti-God court. So the secular court, the anti-God court, is going to grant the divorce no matter what. And what they'll tell you is that we have no option. Well, there's a lot of things actually we're fighting it from a constitutional level. So I can tell you that this is a direct attack to Texas Family Code 6.001, which is our no-fault divorce statute. The statute enables petitioners to obtain a divorce for any reason, for no reason. They can make up a reason. The respondent doesn't have to know the reason. There is no defense. This is a statute which it's a lawsuit. First off, we need to remember it's not, oh, they're going to help me through the divorce process. No, this is a lawsuit. You're being sued and you have no defense. Can you name up any other lawsuit like that? Do you have any? I mean, is there any lawsuit that just the moment that you're alleged to have done something, you're guilty? Maybe if you're Donald Trump over some things, I don't know. But I mean, the reality is that when you're alleged to have done something, you should be able to present a defense. That's what due process is, to be meaningfully heard. There is no defense in the issue of unilateral, forced, no-fault divorce. And by the way, before I continue further, this was an issue that we had in our Texas GOP platform. In 2020, I got the platform changed. It's been around for 15 years, I think it was, that we're calling upon the legislature to rescind no-fault divorce. I put one word into that platform: to rescind unilateral no-fault divorce. Because if you have a contract, and I'm not going to comment on this, but if you have a regular contract, usually you can sue for material breach of the contract, which would be some type of a fault. And usually there's an opportunity to rectify or remedy that fault, or you can get out of the contract by mutual consent. So what I wanted to do by putting in the word unilateral, it would just say that it's a specific type of no fault divorce, because this gives the respondent, who in many, many instances says, wait a minute, I don't agree with this. And he's
And
watching.
Jeff, let me interrupt real quick. I think
Sure.
1 Corinthians 7 would support that as well, when it says to allow, if the unbelieving spouse chooses to leave, let them go. But it should be up to the person who is being violated,
Right.
who the person that's being harmed by the breaking of a covenant, because we're not talking about something that was easily slapped together and easily pulled apart. When you pull something apart like that, everything breaks. So that person has the right by God to say you can go or not go, and what you can go with, what you're allowed to take. If they take anything, it's either theft or it's grace, and they can give as much grace as they want.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing with 1 Corinthians 7, which I think people don't recognize, is that even in the context of people abandoning their spouse, the concept, as I understand it, was more so that you had two people, the gospel was preached, one of them became a believer, the other one didn't. So, I mean, it is completely unthinkable in Jesus' mind that two people that are walking with him would be divorced. Now, when you have two unbelievers, one person converts, and it tells the believing spouse, well, if your unbelieving spouse wants to stay with you, do not divorce him, do not divorce her. But if this person wants to leave, you're not in bondage. God has called us to peace. And I mean, there's a lot of variations among different denominations, religions, Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, like that, how that gets played out. But again, it's a situation where two people have come to Christ, or one person's come to Christ, the other one has not. This is not written for believer and believer. We are our marriage represents the love of Christ, the relationship of Christ and the church.
And your wife still claims to be a believer.
A strong Christian.
Strong Christian.
And the church will let her get away with that.
That is obscene.
It's worse than obscene. Absolutely, it's obscene. And Joe, I know if we've talked privately about some of the things that these people have said. It is horrible. I'm trying to answer the question. Then also I'll get back to this too. But they gave me this thing called a therapeutic separation agreement that they wanted me to sign, and I'm like, what is this therapeutic separation agreement? Well, it was a godless document. And I wrote back, I said, in good conscience, I cannot and I will not sign this. And the very first condition, it says that the husband and wife should get together and talk about the separation. It can be a time of great blessing. 1 Corinthians says just the opposite. You marry each other, you're one. And now they're taking, well, we're going to split you apart as two. There may be some instances where this is valuable, if in instances of abuse or addiction or adultery or something like that. I can see that. But I also said too, nowhere in the document did it talk about the purpose of God for marriage. There are covenant separation agreements. This had nothing like that. And they said, well, if you can't agree on the separation, it shows that you're in trouble. I'm like, what? And then in the third paragraph, it changed the word from therapeutic separation to temporary separation. I'm like, do you believe in temporary marriages too? Do we have trial marriages?
Jeff,
what is this?
Let me include the pastors here and ask them, because I've talked to them both about this before, and I know what they're going to say. Guys, how do we reconcile Paul in 1 Corinthians 7 with Jesus' statement that you can't have a divorce except for sexual immorality, if not to say that any separation is divorce? I mean, I think that's the only logical way. I think every other theological idea about divorce is just inconsistent.
Yeah, I think the advice that pastors give, well, why don't you take a time of separation, is basically saying, here, why don't you take this poison pill in the middle of your healing, and hopefully this is going to work out well for you.
Yeah, nobody's jumping back in the fire. I think it's 8% of people who go through counseling while they're separated come back together, because you're not jumping in that fire. You got to fight through the pain together. If you're separated, you're not going back to that pain. You just won't. So Jeff, tell us, tell us some of the ways that you're going to be fighting this. I think one of the most, and I teased this out to a bunch of people at Cornerstone Church, so we got to cover it. One of the things I think is amazing is you're going to take one of your 12 ways to attack no fault divorce is to use Obergefell against the folks that pushed Obergefell down our throat. Tell us about that.
Sure. Back in 2015, we had the Obergefell v. Hodges decision. And basically what they did, now remember, this is another activist judge stuff where because people did not want same-sex marriage. They voted it down again and again and again. So Obergefell goes to the Supreme Court, and then Justice Kennedy talks about, federally, at a federal level, well, basically the status of marriage bestows a constellation of benefits upon you. And how can we deprive two people of the same sex who want these benefits? How can we deprive them of these benefits simply because they're of the same sex? So when I read that, I talked with a friend that I've been working with about this a long time. I said, look at what they've said here. If they keep Obergefell, they have to get rid of no fault divorce, because what they're saying is we cannot deprive these people of these federal benefits. And there's also state benefits. There's one law professor out of South Carolina, and I think her name is Marcia Zug, but she said that marriage bestows upon you over 1,150 federal benefits and additional state benefits. So if these benefits, we really can't deny two people who love each other these benefits. How can you take them away from me? I am a legally innocent man. And you can simply because my wife, or when it happens to women, because trust me, Joe, there's a lot of women that are calling me that are saying, we will fight for you because they've gone through what they've seen, the destruction, they live in poverty, whatever has taken place. And these benefits are being deprived. They're innocent people. And why is this allowed? Now, I would say if a person wants to change his or her marital status, I don't know how you do this necessarily, go ahead and do it yourself. But the person left behind should at least have those benefits still, because you're taking away benefits from the person for no reason. That is unjust. Now, the best thing, of course, is to, people need to have discipleship. I mean, really, this is not an issue of counseling. Sometimes it is. I'm going to say sometimes counseling will help, but it's an issue of teaching people radical discipleship. We're supposed to love our enemies. The person that we've married, for the most part, we married because at one time we said, I love this person. I'm going to spend my life with this person. This person is chosen by God for me. And now they're going to you're treating them as worse than an enemy. You're treating them like an unbeliever, and you're claiming to be a strong Christian. That's completely inconceivable. But Obergefell, yes. I said, the moment I saw Obergefell, I said, look at this. If they're arguing that we cannot deny two people of the same sex these benefits, then how is it that they can keep no fault divorce, unilateral divorce? Because they're going to give them to people of the same sex, and they're going to take them away from people that have made a commitment to be married simply because one person says, I think the marriage is insupportable. I'm going to leave. So that's how we tried to flip. But yes, I do have that in here as one of the arguments for sure. But there's another issue too, and I mean, being as we're speaking with you gentlemen here, we have a conscience clause in the Texas Constitution that the government shall not compel us to act against our religious conscience. That's Article 1, Section 6 of our Texas Constitution, and it says, in no matter whatever, nothing. But we also have, I don't know if you remember, but back in 1993, there was the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was sponsored by those conservative stalwarts, Ted Kennedy and Chuck Schumer, and signed into law by Bill Clinton. So these great conservative, these right-wing conspiracy. Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be getting on into this right now. But
yes,
anyway,
you should. Mockery. We love mockery here.
Yeah,
tearing down high places.
And in fact, I'm actually using this in a different scenario right now because that protects us against federal involvement. But then I think it was 1998, 99, they said this became a state issue. So Texas passed its own version, the Texas Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which is codified in our Texas government code, 110.003. And basically, what it does is that you can take a look at any law, past, current, future, and because if it infringes upon the government has to show a compelling interest why the statute allows them to violate my religious practices, my religious freedom. And as a Christian, I believe that my marriage is to honor God. I am to learn how to love my wife, serve my wife, pray for my wife, forgive my wife. She's supposed to learn as well various things in her role, toward me. And we have duties. And the other thing is that as a pastor, you can be eliminated from a position simply by going through a divorce. There was a friend of mine who just said, my sister divorced this one man. He was a godly pastor, never swore anything like that. And the moment they got divorced, he lost his job. And then if you look at 1 Timothy chapter 3, elders are supposed to be the husband of one wife. Deacons are supposed to be the husband of one wife. Now, again, I understand that there's various interpretations, but you can go back to apostolic canons way before that basically talk about the necessity of being, I would say that the husband, it says the husband of one wife, and it doesn't completely address the divorce issue, but if you are divorced, you either have to remain celibate, or if you remarry, you lose the privilege to serve in certain offices, and people can lose their office. The other thing that has happened down here is that we've had pastors that have gone through this, and the courts will tell the pastor, you can't pray, or any religious person, you can't pray with your children. You can't read scripture to your children that talks about, this happened with the Jeff Younger case. He was not allowed to teach his children about biblical sexuality because his ex-wife, his annulled wife supposedly, said that their son wanted to be a transgender. So when Jeff would dress the boy like a boy, do boy things with him, which is what he wanted to be, read the Bible with him, he was not allowed to read about sexuality. And we've had other people that a pastor could not take their child to work on a take your child to work day because he was a pastor of a church. So this is a grave violation that our government is foisting upon us on our religious liberty, on our religious freedoms. And the government has no authority to do that. Furthermore, the courts have to define what is the legitimate nature of the marital relationship. And this is what happened back in 2001 when Justice Kim Thompson Frost said, this is a religious issue. The courts are not allowed to rule on this issue. Therefore, this statute is unconstitutional from the get-go. And she was the lone dissent. It was a 3-justice panel. I think the one justice kind of used some circular logic to get to his position. But I think that she set it up for us in the future to actually say, look, you have to use these arguments to get rid of this stuff. And so this is this very, very big issue, because can you imagine that two churches go to the court and say, well, we believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. They believe in a post-tribulation rapture. This one doesn't believe in any rapture at all. Courts, we want you to decide what's the best thing.
That's a great analogy.
Wow,
that is a phenomenal analogy.
Yeah, but the thing is, and Texas law, Texas jurisprudence says marriage is an institution ordained by God, founded by God, created by God. So if it's created by God, why can the state tell us regulate that?
Wow. So divorce is basically a disaster for everyone involved, because if you're the one that initiates a divorce, you're outside the will of God and you're rebelling against God. If you're the one that gets divorced, you're probably getting your heart broken, your heart ripped out, and you're being separated from what God has put together. And then if you have children in the mix, I have to go on a limb and say it's probably terrible for children. Now, I have a friend who says it worked out a little bit because both of their parents that got divorced started buying him extra stuff and tried to win his love. But really, what would have been better for any child involved is just to have both parents in the home.
Absolutely. And you make a very good point here. There's some lady, and I forget her name, but she wrote the 2-parent privilege. If there's a website called Them Before Us, and it talks about the advantage of having both parents. And that judge who just died, Judge Frank, the guy that everybody used to love to listen to because he was a very compassionate judge, he was talking about how he came from Italy and they were growing up and they didn't have much, but he was so rich because he had both parents. And both parents in the home. This is another part of the divorce ideology that has been foisted upon children, to say that children are resilient. Children will be happy if their parents are happy. That is an absolute lie. It has silenced children. Children of divorce should be speaking up. But the thing is, they've been shamed for some. And it's like, we can't really talk about this. Everybody tries to say that, well, you're supposed to be strong. No, the parent should be strong for the children.
Because the children haven't learned to deal with their own sin nature yet. right? So they're going to
Yeah.
manipulate the
Yeah.
single parent, especially the single mom. They say now that there's new studies that come out that say a single mom is the most dangerous environment for a child because she's more easily manipulated because she's more emotional than the single father,
And,
right?
and it,
Whereas at the early years, you got to have the mother, right? You got to
Yeah.
have the mother, but after you get past that certain point, then you got to have the father. The real thing is we need them both all the time.
we need them both all
And
the
to
time.
Amen.
separate that at all is just a wicked sin, and the
It is.
government needs to be called out for their participation in this.
Right.
Yep.
And that's absolutely true. And the other thing is, when you mentioned the thing with a single mother, people say, well, maybe it was an abusive father. Statistically speaking, a child is much safer with a father than with the mother's new boyfriend or fiance or
Yep.
new husband.
I
I
was
got a friend
talking
who's
to our friend Amaro, who lives in Malawi, and he says every time there's a divorce, the father automatically gets the children for that reason, because they find that it's unsafe for a child to go into another home, and then with the wife, because she starts marrying or living with men that aren't safe. And you know what? That limits the divorce rate by a lot.
Yeah, so and that you make a very interesting point there, because right now our state incentivizes divorce. It incentivizes divorce. Number one, if you file for divorce, you always get it. Then they say, well, at least get 50% of the stuff. So if I leave the company that I work for, I don't get to take stuff with me. I have to return my stuff. And we have these so-called community property laws, which only make sense in a Christian context. I mean, there were some historical reasons for this, but now what they've taken again, they've taken this practice that some Christians helped to set into place, but they've taken Christ out of it. Community property is for the community. If you're leaving the community, why do you take anything? Because the community is the marital community, and that's what the divorce attorneys know, that they can fight over these things. And by the way, your children are part of that marital community somehow. They get a stranger will tell you when you can see your children, when you can't, and if you violate those orders, you may end up in jail. Or if you have to pay to have somebody else watch your children, called child support, when you're a fit and willing and able person to do something, they can put you in jail for that. And the state also gets incentivized with federal money under the Title 4D program. So the state is not an unbiased, objective, neutral entity in this whole thing. They also know that they can collect money from this stuff. And that's what they've done. So they've oppressed people, they've exploited them. And the attorneys that are involved in this stuff charge sometimes $500 an hour, $250, whatever. I mean, a lot more than what an average person makes by far. And they know how to. I've talked with paralegals. I said, "Oh yeah, the divorce attorneys would get together and they say, I'm going to do this, you're going to do that," and they would negotiate on how to basically exploit the parents' finances. And so what I
You walk in, yeah, and I don't know if this is in Texas, but in New Jersey, you walk in, you have to fill out a case information statement, whether you're the divorcee or you're the one calling for the divorce or the other person is. That case information statement is basically an income statement and a balance sheet.
yeah.
Everything you make now and in the future, and every asset you have, and then they measure you and they say, oh, you got this much fight in you, and they drain it all.
Right. And Joe, let me say the first thing about that too. Is that not a violation of our Fourth Amendment under the US Constitution?
Of course.
As a legally innocent individual.
But other areas in our culture and our government, we've destroyed the Fourth Amendment in so many ways with the Patriot Act, and I mean, Pastor Jeff's probably signed off a million vaccination letters to people trying to get exemptions.
Yeah.
And our culture doesn't care about that. So tell us another thing. So you're going after Obergefell, which I think one of the problems in divorce, you've got all these big Christian law firms out there that will fight for your First Amendment right and other rights. They won't touch divorce, but they should want to go after Obergefell, and they should want to help you in this situation. And then you said the other thing that we talked about. I know you have 12 of these. We're probably going to get to 4, but I'd like to get to at least 4. Then the second thing you said was the government. Well, it was government benefits, and then what? And tell us another one. What's another thing you got on the list?
It starts off right now. So 6.001 fails to state a legally cognizable cause of action. because the judge is supposed to be ruling over, has some discretion over your actions. What is the action? Insupportability is a state of mind. This is it's a subjective state of mind. So I can be sued because my wife, or my wife can be sued if I'm the one doing it because I have a subjective state of mind that says things are insupportable. What did I do to make it insupportable? Give me some facts. If there are no facts to adjudicate, what am I even here for? So that's why the first thing we're trying to do is dismiss it, a motion to dismiss, because there's no legal cause of action. But the other thing is, and this is very important, is that this has now become a legislative divorce. It's a huge separation of powers issue. The way that the code is written right now, and I've had judges tell me this, and I've got a video on my YouTube channel where the judge says, I have to grant a divorce. And I said, no, you don't. It says you may. No, I have to. I have to follow the law. And so he's telling me I have to grant a divorce. I said, if I brought 20 witnesses there, would it make a difference? I don't know. He has to do it. So what they've done, the judiciary, which is supposed to have some type of discretion and actually weigh a legitimate legal matter, the legislature has already stated that the divorce will take place. Now we're just dividing up the assets and stuff like that. That is called the legislative divorce. Our Texas Constitution, Article 3, Section 5613, says that the legislature is forbidden from writing special laws granting divorce. And that's a huge separation of powers issues. Article 2, Section 1 talks about the separation of powers. The legislature is not allowed to create divorce on demand, and that's what they've done. So the special person, the person who is requesting the divorce, always wins on the merits, simply because he or she says it's insupportable. There is no defense. You can't stop it. Mm-hmm.
Question: If there was no marriage license involved and the two parties had signed or verbally created a covenant only in a church, maybe with a document that was filed, and there was only that document, there was no family court, no state involvement by a license, would it then go to the other person to grant the divorce?
So that's a very interesting question, because in Texas we have common law marriages, and that's what they would probably try to put it under, as the common law marriage. However, it's interesting that you asked this question, Joe, because just today somebody sent me an article about a judge up in Collin County, and it was a Muslim lady wanted to divorce her husband, but she had signed a prenup, a Muslim prenup. So now the judge said, you need to go back to your religious authorities for this. So she wouldn't grant the divorce. Now,
that's awesome.
That creates a very interesting dilemma, because I already know what's going to happen in Islam. Like I said, as a missionary to Muslims, so I understand what's going to happen, what's going to not happen, unless somehow they've adopted and have now taken on the whole sexual revolution as well. But I forget what your original question was there.
I was pointing out, and this is something a lot of people don't recognize, is that when you get married, your marriage license doesn't attach you to your spouse. It attaches the married entity to the state. So if we get the state out of it, and the two people getting married then have the only enforceable arrangement is the covenant marriage that they're doing between them, and one of them wants to leave, it would make logical sense to me, under biblical law, that it would be the other person that would say, okay, you're free to go. You've denied, in other words, we go to 1 Corinthians 7 again. You've denied Christ. You're an unbeliever. You want to go. Bible says you can go.
Yeah. And what I would say about this is that this is fraud by the state, because I would say that if the state is issuing a marriage license, it should tell people this is a temporary marriage license until one person wants to leave. Because in the body of Christ, as a believer, as a pastor, you marry people. If people told you, Pastor Jeff or Pastor Tim, hey, I want you to marry us, we're going to be married for 2 years, and I'm going to get a divorce, would you marry them?
Nope.
Well, what about 5 years?
Nope.
How about maybe after 11 years?
Till death do you part.
Okay, that is the covenant that we make. The state has an actual legitimate policy interest to see people stay married. But when you get married, I believe it's complete fraud. The marriage license is fraud. By the way, Alabama has done away with the marriage license. Good for Alabama. But the
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
Yeah. But the thing is that if the state is not defending the institution of marriage, it's fraud. And I believe that if you're going to issue the license, that you should also have some type of duty to make sure that the people are maintaining that you just don't get divorced automatically.
U.S. Constitution mandates that the state defend contractual agreements. That would include covenants.
Yeah, well, that
That
would
is a
include covenant.
federal law, and they have an obligation
Yeah.
under the supreme law of the land, i.e., the Constitution.
So it's
But that's
interesting.
what the divorce. That's what the license does. It
Right.
negates that. That's
Right.
why they have the license.
So if you look at Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution, it talks about the impairment of contracts, how that should not impair contracts. And there was a case that went back to 1819. It's called Woodward, the Board of Education or something like that Board of Education, Dartmouth Board of Education versus Woodward. I can't remember the exact title of it, but basically it argued contract law there. And this was for the contract that was actually created before the United States was formed. And, you cannot impair the obligation of contracts. And now the divorce attorneys will try to say, well, we now have Maynard v. Hill, and it tells us that marriage is more than a contract. It's a status, but it's not less than a contract. So you're absolutely right. And also the state constitution say the same things. They shall not impair the obligation of contracts, except marriage.
This is the abuse of the court system. So here's like let's give the church some grace, because we're all the church, right? All of us here. We need a little grace. The church is sitting back doing church stuff, and these judges and these attorneys are changing the law. Our elected representatives aren't even involved in it. We don't know what's going on. There was no national debate when no-fault divorce rolled through the states.
Just like in Bolshevik
where was
Russia.
the debate in the public square? It didn't happen.
Yeah. This was a designed social experiment to destroy our country. And if you go back to 1963, look at what was read into the congressional record. They talked about the Communist Party, I believe it was USA, read somebody actually read this into the congressional record about one of the things that communism wanted to do was to make divorce easy, painless. The march through the institutions, as Gromsky used to talk about it doesn't take place immediately. It takes place incrementally, an inch here, a foot there, a couple of more inches here, until finally we are living in a society that our founders never, ever envisioned. And as far as our protection as people of faith, people of God, they are non-existent. And I shouldn't say non-existent, but when it comes down to marriage, forget it. Doesn't make a difference. Oh, that's nice and convenient of you believing that little fairy tale. And by the way, the other thing is that I was going to mention, Joe. So, freedom of speech and viewpoint discrimination. There was a case. This is my personal opinion on this. There was a case back in Massachusetts. I think it was 3 years ago, called Shurtleff versus the city of Boston, and it went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled 9-0 in favor of Shurtleff. What was the issue? The issue was that Shurtleff wanted to fly a Christian flag over the city of Boston. And the city of Boston denied it because we can't have this religious symbolism on our flying over the city of Boston. Now, they had flown, I think, over 270 flags, including LGBTQ flags and everything else. And so they sued, and they went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said this was religious viewpoint discrimination, that they exercised against these people simply based on the Christian imagery of a flag. And what does the Bible say about our marriage? Our marriage is not just a symbolism. I mean, the mystery is great of Christ and his church. And so, but again, as soon as somebody says insupportable, it doesn't make a difference what defense I give. That is a predetermined outcome. It's going to be done. It's viewpoint discrimination against me. It's against my religion as well. So that's another issue that we've raised. Like I said, we have 11 arguments here. We probably could have added more, but these ones
here. What's the strongest one? Because we're getting close to finishing up. I think Jeff probably have a question or two to try and get out because you've been so interesting. But
yeah, I don't know which is the strongest one, because I've talked with a number of people and they're like, this is the strongest one. This is the strongest one. No due process is the strongest one. Equal protection is the strongest one, because two people come to the same, for the same marriage, they should have equal protection, but they don't, because the plaintiff, the one who's the plaintiff or the petitioner will always be favored. So where's the equal protection for me as a respondent? There is none. But I said we have 11 of these arguments. And by the way, I put out a couple of videos. I'm going to be putting out some more, trying to go in each of these individual arguments into some degree. That way, I'll help keep
Send
them
me a couple of links.
order.
I'll put them in the show notes, and I'll put them on the website at
Absolutely.
highplaces.com,
Yeah.
so we
Yeah.
can, if people
Yeah.
want to go grab the links from there, they'll be there. Pastor Jeff, Pastor Tim, what questions do you guys have? I know Jeff brought out a lot of stuff. What do you think people in our church are thinking right now if they got through the whole thing?
Well, I think probably a more practical question: what can we at the local level, say a parishioner in New Jersey, do to support marriages in the church and in the state?
So the first thing I would say is that you need to start preaching that divorce is a sin. That there is no way. I talked with one pastor. In fact, I go to a church right now because it's a Protestant church, and Catholics believe that marriage is a sacrament of God. And I'm like, why don't the Protestants say this? I finally found a Protestant church that says there are three sacraments. There's baptism, there's a Lord's Supper, and there's marriage. And that's what I believe. Marriage is a sacrament. It's a grace given to us from God. It also represents everything. And I think we need to be talking about what exactly marriage is. And God's will is 100% against divorce. We talked with one guy and he said, I already know I can pray with certainty 100% divorce is not in the will of God. And we need to be actually defending marriage and looking at things like, well, you know what? Maybe she's just having a problem. Maybe he's having a problem. Brother or sister, it's sin. How do you deal with sin? Repentance, faith in Christ, looking to the Holy Spirit, and perhaps having people around, having people to help work through it. But divorce has to be thrown out. And they even say about counselors, if a counselor has any thought that maybe divorce will be a solution, run. Don't stay there. Run away from that, because that will seek through. And as a pastor, Pastor Jeff, Pastor Tim, you must be strong on marriage. And we have already redefined marriage, because I've said marriage is till death do you part. We have redefined marriage by saying marriage can be temporary, because we allow divorce so easily.
But we would allow for the exceptions in the case of adultery and abandonment.
So what I would say is yes, but I would also say that because those are scriptural exceptions, and yes, we have some things we have to teach, be very compassionate with, but at the same time, and you're going to get people that are going to say, no, there's no exception. Okay, you know what? That's an issue that I'm going to let other people discuss a little bit more. But I will say that divorce does not need to be automatic, because I've known people that have been divorced and remarried and divorced and remarried and then and divorced and remarried again to each other 3 times, and they've claimed insupportability.
Jeff, don't you think that the problem is that we don't have a specifically Christian marriage, and divorce is part of marriage? So
we also don't have a specifically
agreement.
Christian. Yeah,
we right. Also, if like Jeff was saying, so if we should allow for sexual immorality and abandonment because that's biblical, but we need a Christian marriage, not a Obergefell marriage.
Absolutely.
Not and we should. One of the problems with Christianity is we're so old that we can't. We don't have any copyrights on anything. There's people stealing our words.
So this gets into another area that I don't think there'll be time to get into right now. But you're absolutely right about that. But I will also say too that we need to have a Christian mindset, because we are being transformed by the world and not transforming the world. That's the problem.
100%.
And then when we talk about what's happening to children of divorce, if you have a church filled with broken families, how are you going to have a strong church? And the results of divorce are transgenerational. It's not just your children, but your grandchildren that will be impacted by this. Divorced people, kids of divorce, tend to divorce more frequently by a large number than those who come from solid families. And divorce is not even mentioned. So it may not impact you personally, but what happens if your son or daughter marries a divorced person and they're all screwed up? And then it will impact you as well. And it may impact you that you cannot see your grandchildren. So, we have to address this. This should be an all-out war. Family was the first institution even before the church, if you look chronologically in Genesis. And marriage is important. God performed the first marriage. Jesus performed his first miracle at the wedding of Cana in Galilee. What's the last event of the Bible? The marriage supper of the Lamb.
Amen.
Yeah. We can't let people redefine that.
Yeah. So
that's awesome. Good stuff.
How much better would it be for all people everywhere if we just tried to do what the Lord said in his word?
Oh, how much better would it be? I remember reading about revivals, like the Welsh revival under Evan Roberts, and they were saying that, the police didn't even have any work to do. So they started to form police quartets and they would sing. Now, the only downside was, from what I read, is that the miners who got converted no longer swore and cursed, and the donkeys did not know how to obey them, because that's the only thing that they responded to was cursing and swearing and stuff like that. So that might be the only downside. But could you imagine? I mean, I grew up in a place where we kept our doors open at night. I would not do that here.
That is so important. And we got to, when we're witnessing to people and we're witnessing to pagans, and you say, you know why we got so many cops? Remember defund the police? Well, you can't defund the police because we got too much sin.
Yeah.
If we had less sin, if people were obeying God, we wouldn't need all these police.
Yeah. And like this whole thing with the transgender movement and stuff like that, what's happening is, I think, is that a child is being formed with half an identity a lot of times due to divorce. So they don't know their whole identity. And it makes it much easier to slide along the gender spectrum. If you have a strong family, and I'm not saying 100%, but I'm just saying if you have a strong family, a boy is a boy, a girl is a girl, a husband is a husband, wife is a wife, they have different roles. They learn this stuff. When you have a situation where you're having kids brought up with single parents, or, like no family whatsoever, because the other thing about family formation, not just family destruction, but families are never formed. The impact of this is huge. And we as the church should be leading the charge. I'll tell you what, I wish that every single church, every pastor would say, look, we're going to petition our legislator. We're going to get other people around it. They cannot stop us. Because if the church were to act as the church, well, we don't want to be involved in politics. I'm sorry, but you're involved in politics by default. You get in there and start to say, this is wrong. This is, and have solutions and have ways. I mean, I've looked and I've said, if churches are allowing divorce so easily, maybe they should lose their tax status.
You're gonna have to read this book.
Okay. Hey, I'll get that. Thank you.
No, I'm gonna send you a copy. This is Jeff's book, Blood Red Church, and he explains the problem with the gray church and the blue church, and the red church needs to go out and start converting other Christians is what has to happen. Other people who claim the name of Christ but don't obey his word, don't love him the way he's defined love. So he's got this Blood Red Church, and you'll love this. So
I will.
You said the right words. They're magic words. I had this out for you earlier.
Okay, gotcha.
But anyway. Jeff, thank you so much. We'd love for you to come back and just tell us all about, what's going on. This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. I'm thinking.
And please, I mean, I say this, just pray for us, because I guess that I'm chosen to be the person. I mean, Joe, I've told you that I felt like I'm not trying to compare myself to Christ, but remember Christ in the garden said, Father, if it be your will, take this cup from me, but if not, let your will, not my will, but yours be done. And I want to see God do something so great. He knocks off no fault divorce. My wife and I have this wonderful marriage that people can say, wow, look at what happened. They almost got divorced. And look at what God's done with them. And then my wife's son, and this is one of the things people don't talk about too, when you have special needs kids, or when you have autoimmune diseases, fibromyalgia. My wife has fibromyalgia, and they have special support groups just for that, to help people through that. And I would love to be out there on the front line. If I'm going to go get involved with another battle, not that I'm necessarily wanting this on my own, but I'm going to get another battle, let's take on the entire thing, because we do not know how to respond to people with these great needs. And we often mischaracterize things, and we cause more suffering, and we inflict more pain than what can be imagined. And so, like I said, like I tell everybody, please just pray, pray. And I appreciate your prayers. And Joe, again, thank you. Sorry, I wasn't expecting this, but when you ask me, that's what happens.
It's awesome. And the worst that can happen to you is you go home to the Lord, right? So you're going to keep fighting. And I know you will, because, you see what we don't know what God will do. Maybe you're not going to break through this, but maybe you push it far enough that somebody else can.
Right.
Who knows?
Yeah.
You just keep plugging, brother.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
John Newton fought slavery his whole life, and then he handed it off to William Wilberforce. But in 1807, he did see the abolition of the slave trade across the Atlantic. It still took another generation for it to come to an end altogether. Let's bring no fault divorce down.
Yeah, and that movie Amazing Grace, I remember when they asked Wilbur, can't you use your voice? You're going to just use your voice to praise God instead of being a voice. We have both. We should be praising God. We should, I'm not a good singer. I sing by myself, right? But we should be able to use our voice to take down evil, to expose evil, to preach righteousness, and to praise God. These are not mutually exclusive activities. And if you can't join, you can pray. We need intercessors. I mean, we need the church of God. And right now, I really believe, Joe, when we've talked about this, I think that we have an opportunity. I don't know that we're going to get an opportunity again in the future, but I mean, I know Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, I've spoken with him about no fault divorce. He hates it. He's a product of it. He and his wife, Kelly, have a covenant marriage. I know J.D. Vance is against no fault divorce. We've talked with Ben Carson against no fault divorce. We have legislators, Dusty Devers in Oklahoma. He's trying to get rid of it. Tony Randolph up in South Dakota. There's another gentleman up in Indiana. We had Matt Krause working here. This is a big issue. And right now what's happening is we're seeing more and more and more people talking about how evil this is, how destructive this is. And I mean, I've had people don't even know me that says you're doing the work of God. And, I know you guys are doing the work of God within the churches and everything. I didn't expect to have people who may not even be Christians telling me you're doing the work of God right now. So that's all I can say.
We thank God for you, brother. Stay in the fight. You're a fellow soldier, and you are supported in prayer. We love you, brother. We're with you.
Thank you so much. Put us on every prayer chain, every list that you can.
We will
all right, guys.
do that.
If you guys got any other questions for Jeff before we tear it down?
Tear it down.
Tear it down is right.
This is what we do, Jeff. If you haven't made it to the end of one of our episodes, we got a little thing we do. First, we lift a brother up, and then we tear a high place down. So
good. Okay.
When you're ready, lift a brother up. If you see I'm sorry, I did it wrong. But if you see a brother down, lift him up.
Okay.
High place. Tear
it down. All right.